Let me tell you a strange truth right from the start. In military aviation, landing a fighter jet after almost completely losing one wing is considered not just difficult or a matter of luck, but practically impossible. Because such a landing is not feasible on paper, not in a simulator, and not in the real world. But on the 1st of May 1983, in the hot skies over the Negev desert, there was an Israeli F-15D. After colliding with an A-4 Skyhawk, it almost completely lost its right wing. Yet instead of crashing, it flew for about 16 kilometers and did something that no one, not even its own manufacturer, initially believed. In this video, we're going to find out exactly how this specific collision actually happened, why the pilots didn't realize they had no wing until the moment they landed. How was the plane controlled without a wing? Why did the talented engineers at McDonnell Douglas who designed and built the F-15 initially say that such a thing was completely impossible? And more importantly, did the F-15 really break the laws of aerodynamics and fly without a wing? Or is this whole story just a big misunderstanding that has not been properly explained for many years? This last point is the most important, and if you do not pay very close attention, you'll misunderstand the whole story. So stay with me until the end of the video. In the early 1980s, the F-15 really hadn't become a legend yet. It was an advanced American fighter jet, but not to the extent that everyone would say it breaks the laws of physics. At that time, it had only been in service for a few years, more precisely since 1976, and many people still, even in the United States itself, they were still evaluating to see what it would really turn out to be. But Israel was different. The Israeli Air Force, which is called the IAF, took the F-15 into action from day one, right into the heart of real combat, not just demonstration exercises. They had named it Baz, which means Falcon, a name that incidentally suited it very well. Now let's take a moment to discuss that special F-15, specifically airframe number 957, the D model. It carries the nickname Marika Shakim, which translates to something like sky glow. Most importantly, before the 1983 incident, this fighter had 4 real aerial kills. This means we weren't dealing with a brand new aircraft. In truth, we were dealing with a seasoned, battle-tested fighter that had seen plenty of actual combat. Let's move on to the first incident. In May 1983, the story of that day's exercise began like this. This exercise was held in the skies over the Negev desert in Israel, and its type was DACT. It was, what does that mean? It means an aerial combat exercise between fighters that are completely different in terms of design, mission, and performance. They're worlds apart from each other. You should know that this type of exercise became serious exactly after the bitter experiences of the Vietnam War, because the pilots realized that when they only train with planes similar to their own, they get caught off guard in real combat. So in this exercise, in this engagement, they put 2 F-15D Eagles up against 4 A-4 Skyhawk attack aircraft. On paper and theoretically, the A-4 stands absolutely no chance at all against the F-15D, because the A-4 is subsonic. That means its speed is less than the speed of sound, and it can't break the sound barrier. Of course, its maneuverability is good, but in terms of speed, it's no match for the F-15 at all. Plus, the A-4 doesn't even have an advanced radar, while the F-15 is considered an air superiority beast. But, well, in real exercises, things might not always go exactly according to plan. That's why, during one of the maneuvers, a 4 number 374 goes up in a vertical maneuver, and at that exact moment, F-15 number 957 enters the same path from above. Both pilots see each other, but the angle and speed are such that the distance closes very quickly. And The A4 Skyhawk catches fire, but its pilot quickly ejects, is safely thrown clear, and survives. This is where the story gets strange. The collision is almost at the root of the wing. It hits the root of the right wing. As a result, almost the entire right wing is torn off. But what about the situation inside the cockpit? No one truly knows this. Fuel is leaking heavily from the wing root. And at this high speed, the fuel vaporizes quickly, covering the right side of our plane like a foggy wall. You should know that there are also single-seat models of the F-15, like the F-15C or A. But the F-15D model is a two-seater. One is the main pilot who sits in the front, and the other is the weapons systems officer or instructor who sits in the back. The most important point is that in two-seater models, each crew member has an independent ejection seat. But usually the ejection system is synchronized, meaning if one ejects, the other is automatically ejected as well, so that no one is left behind. In this story, Ziv Nadivi, as the front pilot, loses control of the F-15 and the aircraft goes into a spin. The instructor in the back seat, Hargal, gives the order to eject. But right here, a fateful decision is made. Although this flight was Hargal's as the instructor, Nadivi outranked him in terms of military seniority. So when Hargal said to eject, he refused and said, "No, we'll continue." And no one could stop him. No one could force him to stop and not continue. Of course, Nadivi's decision was not driven by heroism or bravado, but rather from a total lack of awareness of the gravity of the situation. He knew the plane was out of control, but he didn't realize that he had completely lost one wing. So he did something that, in theory, could have been the best possible choice he could make. He turned on the afterburner and, most surprisingly, it actually worked and stabilized. Let me clarify something right here. In classical aerodynamics, the wing is the main source of lift. By lift, I mean the upward force, the same force that allows an object to overcome gravity, take off from the ground, and stay in the air. Now, when a wing is almost completely torn off, the balance and equilibrium of lift are severely disrupted, and this causes the plane to enter a stall, and even worse, a spin. A stall means that since the wing can no longer generate enough lift, the speed or flight angle gets disrupted and the plane suddenly drops and starts to fall. But a spin is an even worse stage. When one wing has lift and the other doesn't, the plane spins around itself while simultaneously starting to fall, and controlling it becomes extremely difficult. In short, according to classical aerodynamics, when a wing is almost lost, a stall or spin is no longer a possibility. It's an inevitable fate. That's why in pilot training they say losing a wing is equal to the end of the flight. Now the question is, with such an incredibly dire situation, how did that F-15 fighter jet survive? The reason was completely clear. It was because the pilot turned on the afterburner. Speed is the killer of stall. What Ziv Nadivi did was exactly the opposite of normal instinct. Instead of reducing speed or looking for an emergency landing, he kept the speed up by turning on the afterburner and didn't let the airflow separate from the remaining surfaces. As a result, lift isn't completely lost as long as there's speed. Stall is often delayed. On the other hand, the F-15 is a beast in terms of thrust, and its thrust-to-weight ratio is over 1. This means that this aircraft can keep itself in the air by sheer engine power, even when the aerodynamic conditions are terrible. But you know, that's still not quite the whole story. Actually, there's an even cooler and more interesting point. The body of an F-15 also generates lift on its own. This means the wing is no longer the only source of lift, in a very similar fashion to a missile, which doesn't rely on wings to stay aloft. Instead, it maintains its trajectory with high speed and intense thrust. Of course, the F-15 Eagle is certainly not a guided missile. but at incredibly high speeds. Its wide fuselage, large rear control surfaces, and the wild thrust of its two powerful engines allow it to still generate some necessary lift and stability, even after losing an entire wing, so the pilot can land the plane safely instead of crashing. You should know that after the initial report reached the manufacturer, their structural and aerodynamic analysis revealed that this flight wasn't a violation of the laws of physics, but rather an unintended use of a capability that even the designers hadn't anticipated. Despite all the daunting challenges of the flight, the runway that the F-15 chose for landing was itself a real challenge. Ramat David Air Base's runway was the closest option available to them, and Nadivi was fully aware of it. If the speed dropped, the aircraft would no longer stay in the air, so he was forced to land at a speed of about 260 knots. That means almost twice the normal speed. The emergency hook was deployed. The hook caught the cable, but it broke off. Braking was done in the most difficult way possible, and the plane finally stopped just a few meters from the end of the runway. When the engines were shut down, the crew came forward, the pilots disembarked, and one of the technicians unconsciously walked away. On the right side of the plane, everyone fell silent right there. The right wing was completely gone. Not half there, not broken, not hanging. There was nothing left of it. Nadivi himself later said, "If I had known I was missing a wing, I would never have tried to land and probably would have ejected right then." But it was precisely this not knowing that led to one of the strangest landings in aviation history. In my opinion, this event was neither a miracle nor a legend nor even a violation of the laws. It was aerodynamic magic. It was a strange coincidence between a ruthless design, the Cold War era, and the intense rivalry between the US and Russia, and a human decision made at the worst possible moment. In fact, maybe Nadivi remembered within a few seconds that ejecting is not always without cost. Ejecting means explosive acceleration, severe pressure on the spine. There's a risk of unconsciousness and serious injury to the neck and back. The bitter reality is that many pilots are never allowed to fly again after ejecting, or they have to live with pain for the rest of their lives. So a pilot never ejects without a good reason. Ejecting is the last resort, not the first reaction. Maybe because of all these risks, Nadivi decided to turn on the afterburner instead of ejecting, and as it turned out, this worked and stopped the spin. Even though the nose came up and the flight, though difficult, became stable, from his perspective the situation was still critical, but this wasn't the end of the story. This is because as long as the plane still seemed controllable, ejecting wasn't the only course of action available. Every pilot is taught from the beginning that their own life comes first. But if it's possible to save the plane too, that's even better. That's exactly why at that moment he said no ejection, we'll continue. Perhaps he was simply thinking that if they had ejected right at that moment, they would end up losing a perfectly good aircraft, even though with this decision he took on a lot of risk. If you were in Nadivi's place at that moment, what would you have done? Would you have ejected, or would you have tried your luck at landing? It's a really tough decision, especially when you don't have much time. But before we finish this incredible story, let me tell you one more unbelievable thing. That specific F-15D with the tail number 957, which miraculously survived the May 1983 incident, was neither retired from service nor decommissioned, nor put in a museum, and not even scrapped. Instead, after that strange landing, they sent the plane off with a lot of question marks to the main maintenance and repair base of the Israeli Air Force in the Maintenance and Repair Unit. At first, the engineers were truly shocked, not only because the plane had survived, but also because the main structure of the fuselage, the engines, and even the flight systems were still intact. For about 2 months, this F-15 underwent major repairs. The right wing was completely replaced and the joints were reinforced. Contrary to what many expected, the plane was fully repaired and returned to normal operational service without any particular limitations. And this is where the story takes an even stranger turn. Just 2 years later, in 1985, this very same F-15, with the same pilot, Marika Shakim, and the same shining presence in the sky, shot down a Soviet MiG-23 in a real combat engagement. That is, an aircraft that everyone was sure had no chance long before this and shouldn't have survived at all. Not only was it repaired, but it returned to service and even scored a confirmed kill. This is clear evidence that some machines and some decisions perform far beyond our initial expectations. And their ultimate fate is much more complicated than we can imagine. It truly is. I have shared all of this to get to this point. Good engineering, better split-second decision-making, and a bit of luck can sometimes push the boundaries of the impossible. But this isn't something that happens every day. That's why, even after 40 years, this story is still being told.